He came into town on a wind-whipped morning, the sky painted with streaks of amber and grey, the kind of dawn that promised nothing but hard truths. Everyone noticed him, the lean frame wrapped in a faded coat, the boots scuffed from miles of trail. His name was Thaddeus Crow, a man whose quiet presence often made folks uneasy, though none could say why. Rumor had it he'd inherited something from a distant kin, a ramshackle cabin tucked away at the edge of the western ridge. The news traveled fast, carried from porch to saloon, and wherever it went, it was met with chuckles, sly grins, and outright laughter. "They say he got that old cabin," drawled Jebediah Harlow, the general store owner, polishing a jar of nails as he looked up. "Might as well have bought hisself a tombstone." The men at the corner table snickered, tipping their hats in mock respect. Thaddeus simply nodded, saying nothing. His eyes, dark and restless, scanned the dusty street, taking in the small town's neat rows of clapboard homes and the wary glances from those who claimed to know him, though none truly did. The cabin itself was infamous, built decades ago by a hermit named Ezekiel Boone. It had long been abandoned, falling into disrepair. Windows stared like empty eye sockets, and the wooden siding had grayed to the color of ash. Vines crept along the walls, thick as ropes, and the surrounding land, though wild and untamed, held a strange, silent beauty. Folks whispered that the place was cursed, that no man who lived there ever prospered. Yet here was Thaddeus, inheriting it without a word of complaint, without hesitation. That alone stirred curiosity, even if it stirred ridicule first. He rode past the saloon without stopping, past the blacksmith's forge, where sparks danced like fireflies, and toward the ridge where the cabin waited. Dust rose behind him, marking his passage, a subtle reminder that the world around him remained unchanged. Children watched from behind fences, their mothers tugging at their sleeves, warning them to keep distance from the crazy Cowboy, as they called him. But Thaddeus did not flinch. He had walked trails that bent under snow and crossed rivers that roared with winter fury. A few scoffs or sideways looks from a narrow-minded town held no weight against what he had endured. Inside the cabin, shadows hugged the corners, and the air smelled of old wood and memories long forgotten. Thaddeus ran his hand along the rough planks of the wall, feeling the pulse of the place as though it were alive. Every creak, every whisper of wind through the broken windows spoke to him, carrying a message that only he seemed to understand. There were remnants of life, a rusted pot in the corner, a shattered rocking chair leaning against the wall, the faint etching of a name on the wooden floorboards. It was Ezekiel Boone, he realized, who had left a trace of himself here, and somehow, in a way no one else could, Thaddeus felt connected. The first night was quiet. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, but inside, Thaddeus lit a lantern and sat at the old table. He unrolled a map he had found among Boone's things, curious lines and marks pointing to hidden pockets of the ridge and forests beyond. Some of the routes were old hunting trails, some paths that no living soul had walked for years. But one symbol caught his eye: a small X, carved with meticulous care, tucked near a stream that ran through a narrow valley. His pulse quickened. It felt like a secret waiting to be discovered, a promise that the cabin, despite its decrepit appearance, was more than just wood and dust. Back in town, the laughter persisted. Harlow and the others debated whether Thaddeus was foolish or stubborn. "Mark my words," Harlow said, voice rising above the clatter of glasses. "That cabin eat him alive. Ain't nothin' left in that ridge but rot and snakes." A few nodded, adding their own tales of misfortune tied to the place. Some claimed their grandfathers had seen strange lights at night. Others spoke of noises that sent livestock running. All of it was dismissed by the town's more practical citizens, yet every whispered story added weight to the growing legend. Meanwhile, Thaddeus moved with care. He reinforced a broken beam, cleared a small patch outside for a fire, and even managed to coax water from an old well that had been forgotten. It was grueling work, but he welcomed it. Each nail hammered, each board replaced, felt like reclaiming not just the cabin, but something larger: his place in the world. As he labored, he often paused to gaze at the distant hills, where fog clung stubbornly to the valleys and a river wound like silver thread through the landscape. In those quiet moments, he felt an unspoken power in the land itself, as if it were acknowledging him, testing him, or perhaps warning him. Late one evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky bled red into the horizon, Thaddeus spotted movement near the ridgeline. At first, he thought it was a deer, but the figure stood upright, watching from the shadows. He squinted, heart thumping. It was a man, old yet imposing, cloaked in dust and time, eyes like steel. Thaddeus didn't flinch. Instead, he lifted his lantern higher, and the stranger nodded slowly, as if confirming something only he could see. Then, just as suddenly, the figure vanished into the gathering dusk. Word of Thaddeus' mysterious encounters spread. The townspeople whispered more eagerly now, half in fear, half in anticipation. Children dared each other to run to the edge of the ridge at night, but most didn't last more than a few steps. Merchants eyed him differently when he came into town for supplies. Their laughter replaced with cautious respect, tinged with unease. Something about Thaddeus Crow made even the bravest wonder if the cabin held more than just old wood and forgotten stories. Thaddeus himself found no rest that night. He sat by the fire, examining Boone's maps, his mind racing. That small X on the map tugged at him like a magnet, yet a shadow of warning lingered in the air. He sensed that discovering it would change everything, not just for him, but for the town that had mocked him. The cabin, the ridge, and whatever secret lay hidden were intertwined, and Thaddeus knew he was standing at the edge of something far larger than he had imagined. By dawn, he had made a decision. He would follow the trail marked on the map, trace the forgotten paths, and uncover whatever lay waiting. But as he packed his few belongings, a cold wind swept through the cabin, extinguishing the lantern. Thaddeus froze. The shadows seemed thicker now, alive, watching, and in the distance, carried on the wind, came a faint but unmistakable sound, a low, haunting whistle, one that didn't belong to any bird or beast. It was a warning, or perhaps a welcome, but either way, it left him unsettled. The town below stirred to life, unaware of the storm gathering above. Folks continued their routines, oblivious to the fact that the cabin, the ridge, and the man they had laughed at were about to change everything. Thaddeus stepped outside, boots crunching on the frost-hardened earth, and looked at the path ahead. The journey promised danger, discovery, and perhaps even vindication. He took a deep breath, feeling the chill in his lungs, and set off toward the X, toward a destiny no one in the town could have imagined, least of all the men who had laughed at him. And just as he disappeared into the morning fog, a murmur ran through the town like wildfire. The men at the general store exchanged uneasy glances. Maybe he knows something we don't, Harlow whispered, only even he couldn't imagine what Thaddeus Crow would uncover, or the events that would unfold once the secrets of the old cabin were finally revealed. The morning fog clung stubbornly to the valley, curling around the trees and settling into the hollows like a living thing. Thaddeus Crow moved carefully, boots sinking slightly in the damp earth as he followed the narrow trail etched on Ezekiel Boone's map. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from fatigue, but from the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying a hint of pine resin and something else, something faintly metallic that made his skin prickle. As he climbed higher, the trail became less distinct, overgrown with brush and thorny vines that tugged at his coat. Boone's markings had been precise, but the world had a way of swallowing paths over time. Thaddeus paused at a small clearing, catching his breath. From here he could see the town far below, tiny and distant, the roofs glinting in the first golden rays of the sun. He felt an odd separation from it all, as though the land itself had drawn a line, saying this was a place where the ordinary rules no longer applied. He remembered the stories his grandfather used to tell him, tales of men who had wandered too far into the ridge and never returned. Most were warnings meant to scare children, yet there was truth hidden in the fear. His grandfather had called the ridge a keeper of secrets, a place where the past lingered stubbornly, refusing to let go. Thaddeus had dismissed it then as the ramblings of an old man, but now, standing in the shadow of the ridge, he understood. The land was alive with memory, and it had recognized him. The X on Boone's map was just ahead. Thaddeus could feel it more than see it, like a pulse in the soil beneath his feet. As he approached, he noticed the remnants of an old campsite stones arranged in a rough circle, blackened with soot. A few splintered logs decayed to the point of crumbling. Boone must have stopped here, or someone else before him. The thought made Thaddeus uneasy. Whoever had been here had left traces, but why? And what had they been guarding? He crouched to examine the ground more closely. There were faint footprints, partially erased by time and weather, leading toward a narrow gully between two cliffs. They were human, but small, careful, as though whoever had made them wanted to remain unseen. Thaddeus felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Boone's hermit's cabin had always been rumored to hold secrets, but what kind of secret required stealth and caution? He followed the tracks, stepping lightly, mindful of every snap of a twig underfoot. The gully opened into a small valley, almost hidden from view unless one knew exactly where to look. A creek ran through it, water glinting like shattered glass in the sunlight. The air was cooler here, carrying a damp, earthy scent that spoke of centuries untouched. Thaddeus noticed something unusual, a formation of stones near the water, arranged not by nature but by careful, deliberate hands. They formed a pattern he had seen before, etched faintly on Boone's map next to the X. He knelt to examine the stones. There was a hollow space beneath them, partially concealed by moss and debris. The edges looked worn, as though something had been placed there repeatedly over years or decades. Thaddeus's heart pounded. Whatever Boone had hidden, or whoever had used this place after him, had left a trail that led straight to the cabin and perhaps to something far more valuable than anyone in town could imagine. Behind him, a rustle of movement made him tense. He spun, hand instinctively going to the knife at his belt. For a long moment, nothing stirred. Then, just at the edge of the trees, a figure emerged, stepping cautiously into the clearing. Thaddeus's grip on the knife tightened. The figure was tall and gaunt, face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, eyes sharp and calculating. Thaddeus studied him. "Who are you?" Thaddeus demanded. His voice echoed oddly in the valley, swallowed partially by the cliffs. The man smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Silas Trenholm. Thought I might find someone wandering where they ought not." His tone was calm, almost polite, but there was an undercurrent of warning. "Seems I was right." Thaddeus considered his options. Silas Trenholm was known in the town as a man who traded in rare goods, secrets, and the occasional rumor that could ruin a man's reputation. He had an air about him that suggested he knew more than he let on, and in these hills, knowledge was often as dangerous as any weapon. "I'm no threat," Thaddeus said evenly, lowering his knife slightly. "I'm here because I inherited Boone's cabin. I intend to find out what was left behind." Silas's eyes narrowed, studying him. Then he nodded slowly, as though acknowledging some unspoken code. "Inheritance doesn't always mean right of claim," he said, "but you might be the one Boone intended." The words hung in the air like smoke. Thaddeus frowned. "What do you mean?" Silas didn't answer immediately. He glanced around the valley, then leaned closer. Boone wasn't a fool. He left things behind for a reason. Some call it treasure, some call it knowledge. Few understand its power, and fewer survive once they try to uncover it. Thaddeus felt a chill. His pulse raced. The stories about the cabin, the ridge, even the warnings from his grandfather, all of it was converging into a truth far stranger than he could have imagined. "I've seen men come and go," Silas continued, voice dropping. "Most never come back. The ridge keeps its secrets well. If you're to succeed, you'll need more than courage. You'll need patience, and you'll need to understand what Boone left behind before it understands you. Thaddeus nodded slowly. He didn't trust Silas entirely, yet there was wisdom in the man's words. He had always been drawn to challenges that others called impossible, and he had survived the wilderness in ways no one else could. This, he realized, would test him in ways even the harshest storms could not. The creek murmured beside them, its gentle rush a counterpoint to the tension that thickened the air. Thaddeus bent down, carefully shifting one of the moss-covered stones. Beneath it was a small iron-bound box, worn but intact, its surface scratched with markings that matched Boone's map. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it, feeling the weight of generations pressing down. Whatever lay inside could be the key to the cabin, or it could be a trap. "Be careful," Silas murmured. Boone had ways of protecting what he valued most. Some of those ways are unpredictable. Thaddeus swallowed hard, lifting the lid. The contents glinted faintly in the filtered sunlighter collection of papers, a small leather pouch, and a strange crystalline object that seemed to catch the light unnaturally. He didn't touch the crystal yet. Instead, he studied the papers. They were maps, journals, and sketches, all written in Boone's hand. Notes about the ridge, the creek, the cabin, and hints of something hidden deeper in the forest. Something that Boone had wanted to preserve at any cost. A sudden sound like a branch snapping underfoot made both men look up. Shadows shifted between the trees. The ridge was no longer empty. Thaddeus's mind raced. Whoever else was out here had been watching, waiting, and perhaps they, too, knew the importance of what he had found.
Silas's hand went to his side, resting lightly on the hilt of a concealed knife. "We're not alone," he said quietly. "And they've been following Boone's trail longer than either of us." Thaddeus's heart thudded. The cabin, the ridge, Boone's legacy, it was all part of something larger than he had imagined. The X on the map had led him here, but it was clear now that he was only at the beginning. Whoever or whatever was hiding in these hills was patient, calculated, and willing to wait for mistakes. As they crouched behind a boulder, watching the shadows move among the trees, Thaddeus realized the truth. The laughter of the townspeople had been premature. They had mocked a man who now stood on the edge of discovery, facing dangers they could not see or understand. And whatever lay ahead on the ridge, whatever secret Boone had hidden, it would demand more than skill or courage. It would demand everything he had. Thaddeus glanced at Silas, then back at the valley. The creek sparkled deceptively calm, the stones beneath his feet ordinary to any passerby, yet he knew better. Boone had left a trail, a challenge, a legacy. In the moment he took the first step into the deeper forest, Thaddeus Crow understood he had entered a world where time, memory, and danger were tangled together, and that turning back was no longer an option. The deeper Thaddeus Crow ventured into the forest, the more the world seemed to shift around him. The trees grew taller, their trunks gnarled with age, branches interlacing to form a near-impenetrable canopy that muted the morning light. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of twig, sounded amplified, as though the forest itself was aware of his presence. Beside him, Silas Trenholm moved with quiet assurance, eyes scanning the shadows, hand never far from his knife. "You feel it, don't you?" Silas murmured, his voice low. The ridge doesn't give up its secrets lightly. Boone understood that. He left warnings in plain sight, but most can't read them. Thaddeus nodded, studying the faint marks on the tree scratches. Notches, symbols that seemed almost random, but were deliberate once one knew how to look. Boone's journals hinted at their meaning, but the language was cryptic, blending natural observations with riddles and cautionary tales. Whoever had followed Boone before had clearly missed these signs or ignored them. Thaddeus realized that might be why few had survived or even returned. The forest opened briefly into a meadow, the sun breaking through to reveal wildflowers swaying in a wind that felt older than time. But the peace was deceiving. Tracks in the mud betrayed the presence of others' boots larger than his own, with a careful tread deliberately obscuring direction. Oh, someone had been here recently. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. The ridge was no longer just a place of solitude or inheritance. It had become a stage for unseen players, each with their own purpose. Silas crouched beside him. "They're close," he said quietly. "We're not the only ones chasing Boone's secret. Mark my words, most of those men would rather kill than ask questions." Thaddeus considered this. The people in town had laughed at him, dismissed him as a fool, yet the reality was far more dangerous than ridicule. The ridge demanded vigilance, intelligence, and a willingness to face fear. He had survived the wilderness before, but this was different. This was a deliberate test, a maze of traps, riddles, and silent threats that Boone or perhaps the forest itself had prepared. The journals pointed toward a hidden structure further up the ridge, something Boone referred to as the heart of the hollow. Thaddeus had no way of knowing what lay there: treasure, knowledge, or danger, but the promise was irresistible. They pressed on, moving carefully along the creek, which twisted like silver through the valley. At times, Thaddeus thought he glimpsed figures watching from a distance, shadows among the trees that vanished whenever he blinked. As they moved, Silas spoke more of Boone's history. Boone wasn't just a recluse, he said. He knew the land in ways most men can't imagine. Legends say he found things others never even dreamed existed. Artifacts, writings, knowledge that could change how you see the world. The cabin wasn't a home. It was a gateway, a map, a warning. Thaddeus absorbed every word, but he sensed an unspoken truth. Silas was selective with his revelations. He revealed enough to guide, but withheld enough to keep Thaddeus dependent on his judgment. Trust was necessary, yet cautious. He learned quickly that Silas had been following Boone's trail for years, studying his journals, noting the hidden markers, and anticipating others who might come seeking the same prize. That knowledge gave him power, but it also made him unpredictable. The forest darkened as they climbed, and Thaddeus felt the ridge closing in around them. Steep cliffs rose on either side, jagged and unforgiving. The creek disappeared beneath rocks and roots, leaving only the echo of flowing water. Here every step mattered. Loose stones threatened to send him sprawling, roots snared boots, and the wind seemed to whisper warnings he couldn't quite understand. Boone's maps hinted at danger zones, areas where one misstep could lead to injury or worse. They paused in a narrow passage between two cliffs. Silas gestured toward the wall of rock ahead. Faint markings etched into the stone were unmistakably Boone's. Symbols for navigation. Notes on hidden paths, perhaps even subtle warnings of the traps ahead. Thaddeus traced the lines with his finger, feeling the history in the grooves, imagining the hermit who had once walked this same ridge, leaving guidance only the observant could read. Suddenly, movement in the underbrush caught Thaddeus's eye. He crouched, hand ready on the knife. From the shadows emerged a figure, young but wiry eyes, sharp and calculating, moving with deliberate stealth. The man froze, seeing Thaddeus and Silas. For a tense moment, neither spoke. Then the young man bowed slightly, almost ceremoniously. "Name's Gideon Merrick," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I've been watching the ridge for weeks. I mean no harm yet." Thaddeus's mind raced. Another presence, another player. How many were hunting Boone's secret? The ridge was becoming a chessboard, each move measured, each observer waiting for mistakes. Gideon's eyes flicked to Silas, sizing him up, then back to Thaddeus. "You two aren't like the others," he said. "You notice what most ignore? Perhaps? Perhaps you're meant to succeed where they failed?" Silas tensed. Perhaps, he repeated, though his tone carried suspicion. Or perhaps he's here to slow us down. Boone's secrets attract men like flies to honey. The tension was palpable. Thaddeus realized that alliances here were fragile, shifting with every shadow, every glance. Gideon, despite his youth, carried the weight of knowledge, the instinct of survival, and a sharp mind. His presence added both opportunity and risk. They pressed on, with Gideon reluctantly joining their path, guiding them through twisted roots and moss-covered boulders. The forest grew denser, the air cooler, and Thaddeus felt a sense of anticipation that was nearly suffocating. Every marker, every symbol, every shadow suggested that Boone's heart of the hollow was close but guarded, not by people alone, but by the land itself. Hours passed and fatigue began to gnaw at them. Thaddeus found himself thinking of the town below, of the laughter he had once heard, and the scorn that had driven him here. Now, far from the safety of civilization, he understood that the ridicule had been irrelevant. The world outside the ridge was small compared to the labyrinth they navigated now. The cabin, the creek, the hidden trails, they were all part of a design Boone had left, a challenge for those bold or foolish enough to seek it. By late afternoon, they reached a clearing where the trees gave way to a steep slope leading to a plateau. Thaddeus surveyed the area. Something about it felt different. The air hummed faintly, carrying an energy he could not name. Boone's maps marked this place, but with only cryptic symbols, no instructions. The plateau seemed alive, charged with history, danger, and promise. Gideon knelt beside a cluster of stones, pointing to faint carvings that mirrored those in Boone's journals. "This is the threshold," he said. "Beyond this, it's not just about finding the hollow. It's about surviving it. The ridge doesn't forgive the careless." Silas's eyes narrowed. "And yet here we are," he said. "We step into what others could not. That means one of two things. We are either meant to succeed, or destined to fail spectacularly." Thaddeus felt the weight of their journey pressing down, heavier than any pack or knife. The cabin, the creek, the forest, all of it had led to this moment. Boone's secret awaited, and with it, challenges no one in the town below could have imagined. The laughter, the ridicule, even the warnings, it was all insignificant now. The ridge held truth, and truth was never easy, never kind, and never forgiving. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plateau, the wind carried a sound that froze Thaddeus in his tracks. Low and haunting, it was a whistle, faint but unmistakable. He exchanged a glance with Silas and Gideon. None spoke. The ridge had spoken to them all, a reminder that Boone's legacy was alive, watching, waiting, and that the hardest part of the journey was yet to come. Thaddeus drew a deep breath. The plateau was the threshold, and beyond it lay the hollow. He could feel it calling him, challenging him, daring him to step forward. One misstep, one lapse of attention, could end everything. Yet turning back was no longer an option. The ridge had claimed his attention, his resolve, and now demanded his courage. And somewhere in the gathering twilight, hidden among the trees, someone or something watched. The plateau stretched before them like a silent challenge. Thaddeus Crow, Silas Trenholm, and Gideon Merrick paused at the edge, each feeling the weight of the ridge pressing down. The forest behind them fell away into misty valleys, and in the fading light, the land seemed almost otherworldly. Boone's maps hinted that the hollow lay just beyond, but no one had seen it and returned to tell the tale. Every instinct told Thaddeus to hesitate, yet he knew hesitation could cost more than pride. It could cost their lives. The ground beneath their boots was uneven, a mixture of rock and soil that seemed to shift with every step. The wind carried whispers through the trees, faint, unintelligible murmurs that made the hair on Thaddeus's neck stand. He tightened his grip on the iron-bound box from Boone's campsite, feeling its weight as though it contained more than paper and crystal. Silas and Gideon moved beside him, cautious and silent, each aware that the next steps would be decisive. "The hollow is close," Silas said, voice low. "And once we enter, we leave certainty behind. Boone built it that way, to test. A challenge for those who think they understand the ridge. Few do." Thaddeus glanced at Silas, then at Gideon. Both men carried an air of confidence, but Thaddeus knew better. Confidence in these hills was fragile, easily shattered by unseen traps or misjudged steps. Boone's warnings had not been idle tales. They were lessons written in the very bones of the land. They descended a narrow ravine, shadows stretching long as the sun sank behind distant peaks. Thaddeus felt every step as though the earth itself were alive, shifting beneath him. There were subtle markers in the rock scratches, grooves, faint carvings. They told him they were on the correct path. Boone's legacy was leading them, but whether it would guide them to safety or destruction remained unknown. As they pressed on, the forest grew denser, darker, and the sounds of life faded. Birds were silent, and the wind seemed to hold its breath. The creek from earlier became a series of small hidden pools, each reflecting dim light like glass mirrors. Thaddeus noticed the reflections often distorted, showing angles that did not match reality. It unnerved him, but he pushed forward, trusting Boone's maps, trusting his instincts. At a bend in the path, they came upon a set of large stones arranged in a pattern that mirrored the carvings in Boone's journal. Gideon knelt to examine them, tracing the lines with a gloved hand. "These mark a threshold," he whispered. "Once we pass this point, the hollow begins." Boone designed it to test those who dared enter. It's not just about discovery, it's about endurance, intelligence, and courage. Silas's eyes scanned the surrounding forest, shadowed and foreboding. "Many have failed here," he said quietly. "They underestimated the ridge, underestimated Boone, underestimated themselves. We cannot afford the same mistake." Thaddeus felt a shiver of anticipation mixed with fear. The ridge had been unpredictable from the start, but here on the edge of Boone's creation, the stakes became almost tangible. He clutched the box tighter, feeling the cool metal of the latch against his palm, and wondered what secrets Boone had hidden that demanded such care, such patience, such vigilance. They crossed the stones, each step deliberate. The air shifted immediately, cooler, heavier, as though the hollow had swallowed the forest sound and exhaled something older, stranger. The trees thinned, revealing a valley shrouded in mist. The hollow itself was a hidden world, a sunken hollow that Boone had carved into the ridge, shaped with intent, marked by history and mystery. Thaddeus paused, taking in the sight. The hollow was more than a depression, in the land it was a labyrinth. Twisting paths, hidden cliffs, and jagged outcroppings forced careful navigation. Every turn seemed to conceal danger, yet the journal suggested purpose, a path meant for those who could read the signs. Boone's genius lay in making the impossible navigable, but only to the observant, the persistent, the worthy. "Keep alert," Silas said, breaking the silence. "We are not alone." Thaddeus's pulse quickened. Shadows moved at the edges of his vision, but every time he looked they vanished. The feeling of being watched was relentless. Every tree, every boulder, every curve in the path seemed alive with observation. It was as though the ridge itself guarded Boone's secret, testing intruders with unseen eyes. Gideon moved ahead cautiously, pointing out markers hidden in the rocks. Boone left instructions, but also warnings. "This section is tricky. Many have walked through, missed the signs, and found themselves trapped, or worse. Trapped." The word lingered ominously. Thaddeus felt a chill. Boone's hollow was no ordinary place, and the longer they moved forward, the more he understood that the forest and the ridge were one entity, a living puzzle that punished the careless and rewarded the patient. Hours passed in silence, the only sounds the crunch of boots on soil, the faint rush of water, and the occasional whisper of wind. Thaddeus felt exhaustion clawing at his limbs, yet he pressed on. Boone's crystal, still in the box, seemed to hum faintly, as if urging him forward, promising insight or reward, but also danger. As twilight fell, they reached a cliff edge, overlooking a deep chasm, partially hidden in mist. Across the gap, barely visible, were jagged rocks and a narrow ledge that marked the next stage of the hollow. A faint trail wound along the cliffside, almost impossible to see from this vantage point. Boone's markings indicated it was the only safe route. Thaddeus felt a knot of fear in his stomach. One misstep, one lapse in concentration, and they could fall into the abyss. Silas moved first, testing the ledge with careful steps, followed closely by Gideon. Thaddeus watched, then stepped forward, every movement deliberate. The wind whipped at the ridge, tugging at his coat, threatening to unbalance him. Midway across, a sudden gust nearly threw Thaddeus off balance.
"Ass!"
He caught himself against the rock, heart racing, breath ragged. Silas turned, eyes narrowed. "Focus," he said. "The ridge tests more than skill. It tests willpower." Thaddeus nodded, pressing on, feeling the intensity of the hollow wrap around him. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound sharper, every movement more dangerous. Boone's legacy was no longer a distant mystery, it was immediate, pressing, alive. At the far side of the ledge, they paused, taking in the hollow below. It stretched farther than the eye could see, a maze of cliffs, caves, and hidden trails. A faint glow emanated from somewhere deep within, a light that seemed both inviting and threatening. Thaddeus felt a surge of anticipation and dread. The climax was near. Whatever Boone had left behind, whatever the hollow contained, it was waiting for them. Gideon leaned close, voice barely audible. This is it. The threshold. Beyond this point, the ridge decides who succeeds. Boone's notes hint at danger, yes, but also at reward. Only those who see, understand, and endure can claim it. Silas's gaze swept the valley, and we're not alone. The ridge always has watchers. Others may have followed the same path, waiting. Boone's secret is coveted, and danger comes from more than the land itself. Thaddeus swallowed hard, feeling the gravity of the moment. The hollow demanded everything: focus, courage, unity among them, but also independence. Boone's legacy was not just a treasure or secret. It was a test of human will, a measure of their determination, and a crucible that would reveal who they truly were. They moved down into the hollow as night approached, the mist rising like a living veil. The glow grew brighter, casting strange shadows on the walls of the cliffs. Every step was fraught with tension, every decision carrying weight. Boone's maps were their guide, but the ridge had a way of twisting the familiar into traps, of challenging assumptions, of turning confidence into peril. And then, faintly, they heard a sound that made Thaddeus freeze. A whisper carried on the wind, soft but unmistakable. Not human, yet not entirely natural. It moved with them, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, never fully revealing its source. The hollow had begun to show its true nature. Silas's hand brushed against Thaddeus's arm. "The moment is close," he said. "Prepare yourself. Boone's hollow is about to test every instinct, every ounce of courage, every bit of trust between us, and only the worthy will make it through intact." Thaddeus felt his heart hammering in his chest. The ridge had taken him this far. The hollow had revealed itself in fragments, and now the ultimate challenge awaited. The climax of their journey loomed, unseen but palpable, a force pressing on them from every direction. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they would have to face it together and alone. The mist thickened, the glow pulsated, and the hollow's secrets whispered promises and warnings simultaneously. Thaddeus tightened his grip on the box, glanced at Silas and Gideon, and stepped forward into the unknown. The ridge had led him here. The hollow demanded his courage, and Boone's legacy waited to be uncovered. And in the stillness, among the shadows and glowing mist, a single truth became clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. Thaddeus Crow's boots crunched against the damp soil as he stepped deeper into the hollow, the mist curling around them like living fingers. The glow ahead had grown brighter, revealing an opening in the cliffside that pulsed with light. Silas Trenholm and Gideon Merrick followed cautiously, eyes sharp, hearts steady despite the tension that had gripped them for hours. The ridge had tested them at every turn. But this was the moment Boone had designed to separate those who merely survived from those who truly understood. The entrance was framed by jagged rocks, and as they crossed the threshold, the temperature shifted. It was warmer here, the air carrying the faint scent of herbs and earth, a strange comfort after the hollow's relentless trials. Thaddeus held the iron-bound box tightly, feeling its weight, as if it were a key to the mysteries ahead. Inside, the hollow opened into a cavern larger than any of them could have imagined. Stalactites hung like frozen spears from the ceiling, and phosphorescent moss cast a soft green glow across the stone walls. A river ran through the center, clear and swift, reflecting the light in shimmering patterns. Boone's journals had hinted at such a place, but the reality exceeded even the imagination of those who had studied the maps. At the cavern's far end, Thaddeus saw it, a pedestal carved from a single block of stone, and upon it, objects that seemed ordinary yet extraordinary in their arrangement. Papers, tools, and the crystal from the iron-bound box were carefully positioned, each item labeled with Boone's meticulous hand. It was clear this was Boone's final message, his legacy meticulously preserved. Thaddeus stepped forward, heart pounding, aware of every shadow and sound. Silas and Gideon followed, but all three remained silent, understanding that the hollow demanded reverence. Boone's notes, scattered across the pedestal, revealed more than maps. They revealed his life, his struggles, and his vision for the land he loved. Each journal entry was a piece of a puzzle, detailing not only how to navigate the ridge, but also how to honor it, how to use its resources responsibly, and how to protect its secrets from those who would exploit them. The crystal, placed atop the pedestal, pulsed softly in response to Thaddeus's presence. He lifted it gently, feeling a warmth radiate through his hands. It was not gold, not jewels, not a tangible treasure. It was something far more valuable: knowledge, insight, and a connection to the ridge itself. Boone had left behind a map of understanding, a way to see the land in ways ordinary men could not. It was both a gift and a responsibility. Gideon knelt beside the pedestal, tracing the carvings with awe. This is more than I imagined," he said quietly. Boone wanted someone who could respect it, who could learn from it, not just claim it. Silas nodded. "And Thaddeus Crow is that man," he said, eyes meeting Thaddeus's. "He's proven himself through the ridge, through the hollow, through the trials." This legacy was never about treasure. It was about character, judgment, and endurance. Thaddeus felt a surge of relief and pride, yet he remained cautious. The hollow had tested them relentlessly, and even now he knew that vigilance was necessary. The ridge, the forest, the cliffs, they were alive with history and power. Boone's design was clever, and it required respect and care. They spent hours in the cavern studying Boone's journals, examining the crystal, and piecing together the lessons hidden in every line and marking. The hollow revealed paths, resources, and secret ways to navigate the ridge safely. It also revealed a deeper truth. Boone had cared not for wealth but for the preservation of the land, for knowledge that could guide future generations, and for the survival of those capable of understanding it. As they prepared to leave, Thaddeus glanced around the cavern one last time. The hollow, shrouded in mist and mystery, had changed him. I understood now why the townspeople had laughed at him when he inherited the cabin they could not see beyond the surface. They did not know that Boone's cabin, the ridge, and the hollow were all connected to something larger than mere timber or stone. The journey back was tense but different from before. Thaddeus, Silas, and Gideon moved with purpose, understanding the landscape with clarity and respect. Shadows that had once unnerved them now seemed like markers, guides, rather than threats. The ridge tested them, yes, but it also guided them home. When they finally emerged from the hollow, the first light of dawn painted the forest in soft gold. Birds chirped tentatively, the wind whispered gently, and the world felt renewed. Thaddeus looked down toward the town, realizing how small and narrow-minded the laughter of the past had been. The cabin, once mocked, was now a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and discovery. He understood that the true inheritance was not the structure itself, but the journey, the understanding, and the strength that had forged within him. Back in the town, the reaction was immediate. Harlow, the general store owner, was the first to notice Thaddeus descending the ridge, accompanied by Silas and Gideon. His jaw fell open. The men at the corner table, once quick to ridicule, grew silent as they took in the sight. The once scorned cabin owner had returned not just with stories but with proof of the ridge's mysteries and Boone's hidden legacy. "They made it," Harlow whispered, disbelief in his voice. "After all, they actually made it?" Word spread quickly, faster than any rumor had before. Townspeople came to the base of the ridge, curious, anxious, even reverent. Thaddeus addressed them quietly, explaining Boone's legacy, the lessons of the hollow, and the responsibilities that came with the ridge. The crowd listened in awe, their earlier laughter replaced with respect. Boone's vision, preserved through Thaddeus's courage and determination, had finally been understood. In the weeks that followed, the cabin became more than a home, became a center of learning, exploration, and stewardship. Thaddeus, guided by Boone's journals and the crystal's insight, taught others how to navigate the ridge safely, how to respect the land, and how to uncover its secrets without greed or haste. Silas Trenholm remained as a cautious mentor, sharing his experience, while Gideon Merrick assisted in mapping new paths and understanding the ridge's hidden intricacies. The town itself changed, transformed by the legacy of Boone and the courage of Thaddeus. Ridicule and doubt gave way to curiosity, respect, and a shared desire to protect what was once overlooked. The cabin no longer symbolized decay or folly, It symbolized wisdom, endurance, and the rewards of persistence. One evening, as Thaddeus stood on the ridge overlooking the hollow, the wind rustling through the trees, he held the crystal and felt its warmth. The journey had tested him, shaped him, and revealed his strength. He understood now that the true treasure was not gold or power, but knowledge, courage, and the ability to face fear and uncertainty with steadfast resolve. Boone had left the ridge as a challenge, but more importantly, as a gift, a chance to see the world in ways ordinary men could not. Silas and Gideon joined him quietly, sharing a look that conveyed respect, trust, and a deep understanding of the journey they had survived together. The hollow still lay beneath them, its secrets preserved, its lessons learned, but its dangers remembered. It was a living reminder that some challenges were meant not just to be conquered, but to be understood. The townspeople, inspired by the tales and lessons of the ridge, began to value the land in ways they never had. Children were taught to observe, to question, to respect nature. Adults learned patience, humility, and the rewards of careful thought and courage. Thaddeus's story became more than a tale of inheritance. It became a legend of perseverance, wisdom, and the unexpected ways life could teach even the most skeptical lessons. At last, standing on the ridge as the sun set behind distant mountains, Thaddeus felt a deep sense of completion. The cabin, once scorned and forgotten, had become a beacon. The hollow, once feared and mysterious, had become a teacher. And the ridge, enduring and relentless, had forged him into a man capable of understanding its lessons and guiding others safely through its wonders. Thaddeus turned to Silas and Gideon, a quiet smile crossing his face. "Boone left us more than a secret," he said. "He left us a responsibility. And now we know what it truly means to inherit the ridge." The three men stood in silence, the wind carrying the faint whispers of the hollow behind them, a reminder of the journey, the trials, and the wisdom earned. And in that quiet, a sense of peace settled over the land. The ridge had tested them, the hollow had revealed itself, and the cabin, once laughed at, now stood as a symbol of hope, courage, the enduring power of knowledge. The townspeople would tell the story for generations of Thaddeus Crow. The man who inherited the old cabin, faced the ridge, uncovered Boone's secret, and changed everything. And while the hollow still held its mysteries, those who followed knew that with courage, patience, and respect, even the most formidable challenges could be met, and that sometimes the greatest rewards were not what one took, but what one learned along the way. Thaddeus turned back to the cabin, its silhouette outlined against the fading light. He stepped forward, knowing that life would continue to test him. The ridge would always hold its secrets, and Boone's legacy would endure. But for now, he had fulfilled the promise of his inheritance. He had survived, understood, and brought life and wisdom back to the land and the people who had once mocked him. And for the first time, Thaddeus felt the laughter of the past replaced by something stronger: respect, understanding, and the quiet triumph of a man who had walked the ridge, faced the hollow, and emerged whole.